So we open up to this kid Nick, who's admiring his father working. A man comes up to him later and says, "You should become a doctor." We flash forward a few decades and Nick becomes a doctor. But hold your applause, ladies and gentlemen, because Nick is also currently attending his mother's funeral. He gets a call while heading to his car and is told that he has to perform surgery. He says, "Alright, bet," and heads to the hospital. He's walking in and gets briefed and prepped. Nick performs an operation and all seems to have went well. He leaves and heads to his family's house to have some alone time. Later, he heads to a bar with his boy, Dr. Lawrence. They start talking it up and drinking a bit. From the corner of his eye, Nick spots a young woman, then gets up to leave in a hurry. He heads home quickly, changes his clothes, and begins to jog. Shortly after, he's arrived at his destination, a house. All seems well and good until he starts climbing a tree to peek into a window. He looks into said window and hey, it's the young woman from the pub earlier. She begins getting it on with some guy, presumably the person she was at the bar with earlier. Nick looks really hurt and quickly climbs down from the tree. He begins running home looking real crushed. He heads to a phone booth and calls Dr. Lawrence. He asks Dr. Lawrence how he could possibly get the young woman back. It turns out the two spent the night together. Lawrence tells him to forget about the girl and focus on the entire relationship he apparently has with this woman named Anne. Nick thinks about it for a bit and goes, nah, that's a bad idea, and heads over to the store to buy and write a letter to the young woman whose name we now find out is Helena. He then quickly drives home because he realizes he was supposed to hang out with his girlfriend today. He arrives to see that she's asleep on his couch for most likely waiting up for him. He rushes over to the phone and calls Helena. Helena, who's still getting it on with the guy from earlier, who, by the way, his name is Ray, reluctantly picks up the phone and Ray doesn't seem too thrilled about it either. She answers the phone, but Nick on the other line says nothing and hangs up. Helena gets pretty upset that she got hung up on and is now not in the mood for whatever it is they were planning on doing. Ray now is really not thrilled and begins getting dressed. He says he's headed to the club for some real fun and peaces out. Helena says alright and happily makes a call for some red wine and vodka. The next day, Nick is making a call when he sees that Anne left him a note. She says that she's headed to work and didn't want to wake him, so she didn't say bye. He continues his phone call while writing Helena's name continuously on a notepad. Okay, flash to Helena's crib. Ray tells her that he wants to see her at the club tonight. She says she has plans to go to Mexico and maybe they should take a rain check. Ray gets pretty upset and starts yelling at her. He then leaves. Back to Nick, who's having guests over. Dr. Lawrence and this other guy, Dr. Harrison, are here too. Nick is looking outside excitedly as if he's waiting for someone to show up. Shortly after, Helena arrives at the party and Nick starts hovering around her all thirsty-like. She doesn't seem to pay him any mind as she struts about the house. She begins taking a dip in the fountain and captivates the entire house, including Nick. But not so much Anne. This guy Russell tries spitting game at Helena, and she doesn't turn him away, so that's a pretty good sign for him. While Nick is changing his coat, Anne confronts him about how he stares at Helena and leaves angrily. Helena leaves with Russell and Nick is thrown into despair. Unlucky. After the party, Nick is listening to his voicemail when he hears one from Helena. She tells him that she left her purse at his house and would like for him to bring it to her at the airport the following morning. The following morning, Nick heads to the airport. He arrived and Helena pops in super upset because it turns out he was so late to bring her purse that she missed her flight. She snatches her purse and storms off. Nick goes over to talk to her and she notices her address book is not inside, so she decides to head back to his house to get it. While in the car, Nick constantly begs Helena to date him, to which she continuously says that she's not interested. Nick ushers her into the living room where he's prepared a meal for them. I wonder when he found the time to do this. It's starting to seem like he was late on purpose, all to get Helena back to his place. He urges her to sit and eat. She realizes that this was Nick's plan all along and leaves after grabbing her address book, pretty upset. Nick is chasing after and calling for her. She gets fed up while on the street and turns to him. She's then suddenly struck by a vehicle. At the hospital, we meet Dr. Allen. It turns out Nick had a hospital shift today he skipped, and this isn't the only day he missed. Dr. Allen decides to pop by Nick's house to see what's up with him. Nick opens the door and is in a pretty good mood. Dr. Allen asks him if he's planning on quitting since he's been absent from work with no notices. Nick tells him it's his bad and he'll be back at work on Monday. Dr. Allen hears a thud in the next room and goes over to investigate on his Scooby-Doo ting. Nick heads to the room in a hurry. Dr. Allen follows him and sees Helena with both of her legs amputated. Dr. Allen steps back and asks what's going on. Nick tells him that she got hit by a car and that he needed to perform on-the-spot surgery. He couldn't take her to the hospital because she might have died if he moved her. He tells Dr. Allen that he had no choice but to keep her at his house. Dr. Allen seems pretty suspicious, as most people probably would, and says, "Yeah man, I think she needs to be properly examined and I gotta call the hospital, bro." Nick says, no, she'll be fine, and that he'll be resigning from his position as the chief surgeon so that Allen could take over. You know, because he's going to be taking care of Helena so much. Wink, wink. Dr. Allen hesitantly agrees and decides not to call the hospital. He heads out to leave and tells Nick not to tell anyone that he was there. Nick says bet and heads back to Helena. Helena's crying and says that she must be dreaming. The next day, Nick brings her a wheelchair. She screams to him that she doesn't need it. A few days pass by and Lawrence heads over to Nick's place. He knocks for a while and gets no reply, so he pieces out. It turns out Nick was home though, but he was too busy staring at Helena's photos to answer. Helena catches him and calls him a whole creep and begins insulting him. He takes her out into the rain and tells her to scream all she wants, no one will hear her. She decides instead to slap him and says she doesn't need him. Nick brings her inside and starts making some coffee. Helena is drying up and calls Nick a failure, to which Nick gets pretty upset. Cut to Ray, who walks into a store. He gives the store owner a photo and tells him to call anytime he sees or hears anything about Helena. Store owner says sure. Back to Helena and Nick. They're having dinner. Anne knocks on the door and Helena immediately begins to scream. Nick quickly gags her mouth and starts wheeling her away. He then invites Anne in and the two begin making up, but Nick then catches a glimpse of Helena, stops and tells Anne that she must go. Anne does so very angrily. Ray begins snooping around Nick's place, but it seems his sneak skill isn't very high because Nick notices him. Nick suddenly calls to have flowers delivered to Helena's house. Helena's talking smack to Nick some more when he kneels down to confess his love for her. Helena takes this opportunity to attack and try to terminate him. But before we can see how this battle ends, we cut to Ray at Helena's house. He sees the flowers Nick sent to Helena's place with a note saying that he misses her. Ray seems pretty perplexed as he was pretty sure that Nick had something to do with Helena's disappearance. Back to Nick, who seems to be okay. He's watching opera, vibing, he seems to be having a genuinely great time. Helena is seen sleeping. The next day we see that Nick has removed Helena's arms since she attacked him. Helena now needs Nick to do everything for her, as she can't even move on her own. Nick is heading back from a jog when Helena tells him that someone will for sure find out what he's doing one day. She says that it will most likely be Ray, and if he does find out, he will eliminate Nick. He replies that she cannot do anything without him now, and it will be pointless for Ray to eliminate him. Nick orders some pills to be sent to his house. He then calls Dr. Lawrence and says that he has Helena at his place. He says that he can talk to her and informs Helena to play it cool. She seems to comply but suddenly begins screaming. Nick shows her that the line has been cut and that he was testing her. She tells him that she hates him and he gets genuinely hurt, stating that he loves her. Nick puts his head on her lap and starts imagining the two of them in love with each other. Later that night, Nick brings home a young woman. Helena watches the two of them and gets a bit jealous. Afterwards, Nick brushes Helena's hair and asks how he did. She doesn't give him a definite answer and for the most part is quiet. Time passes and the two start talking more, seemingly getting closer as Nick caters to her needs willingly. Helena asks Nick if he really loves her. He says most definitely. She then tells him to kiss her and he does. She asks him to order them some red wine and vodka and he complies to that as well. The store owner notices that the order sounds quite familiar. It's the same thing Helena always orders. He immediately calls Ray. Nick is touching Helena sensually and does not notice that Ray creeps up the driveway. He walks into the house and sees the wild scene before him. He starts throwing Nick around and Helena tells him to chill. This is none of his business. Ray says I beg to differ and continues jacking Nick up. A statue is about to fall on Nick when he wakes up. Yes, folks, it turns out the whole movie was a dream. Well, after Helena got hit by the car anyway. Dr. Allen comes in to inform him that Helena's surgery was a success. Nick walks in to check on her and sees that she's still unconscious. He holds her hand but leaves before she wakes up. At home, Nick still dreams about Helena and that's where the movie ends. Thanks for watching, folks. The "it was all a dream" trope isn't my thing, and if it isn't yours either, I'm glad I just wasted my time and not yours. Like and subscribe for more videos like this and take care.